Good evening, Burlington, and all the ships at sea. I don't know where to begin. I'm Pat Moreno. I'm one of the hosts of this program. By the way, this is our 103rd program that we will have done over the past, I don't know, 3 years that we've been at this. I am the sole representative of our particular group this evening, so if you'll bear with me, but let me just tell you first about future intended programs in the very near future, as a matter of fact, within the month of November and then into December. We anticipate, let's see if I have my list right here, possibility of not a possibility, he has already agreed, John Sanchez, the head of the DPW here in town, to talk about the new hookup for, the MWRA and where we will be drawing our water. That's a big issue here in town and a big cost. Jim Lyons, who is the head of the Republican Party here in Massachusetts. He is the gentleman who was given the responsibility of organizing and directing the future of the Republican Party. I'm hoping that he's going to be on. I don't know exactly which date. Please, if you will, watch on the Tuesdays. I expect to have Kevin Duffy. He is one of the principals in the development of the 19.5 project. They will be opening soon, and Kevin has promised to join us. I'm not sure exactly what date, but as we move along, I will, and you can always call here. You can call BCAT and find out who exactly on any given. It's always at the same time, 8 to 9 on a Tuesday night. Herb Chambers, the automobile magnate, has also agreed to join us at some point, as well as some other personalities from here in town. So we've got some great people coming, but all of them do not equal the importance of the individual that is with us tonight in terms of the message for us as Americans, especially in this our conflicted world today, political world. She brings a great message, not only in terms of not interpreting, but reading and understanding the Constitution of America, but also her own view. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And of course, I'm talking about Catherine White, who is a self-taught constitutional expert. She has done shows, she has been interviewed, she is frequently, you may well have seen. If you haven't, you're in for a treat. This lady understands the Constitution and the intent of the Constitution, what it actually says and permits. And with that, I'm going to say welcome, Catherine, and thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you for asking me.
America now is 260 years old, I think.
200 and a bunch.
200 and a bunch years old. We've endured. We've had some moments that have been extremely difficult, not the least of which was the with Lincoln, the Confederacy and the problems of that whole episode. And there have been so many other crises along the way. You said when we were just talking before that we always seem to prevail, or the Constitution seems to prevail. Is that because of the truth it speaks? Or the
because
importance?
of the strength of the structure, and because it is founded in truth. And those tend to prevail, strength and truth, when they're combined together as they are in the Constitution, do tend to prevail.
Do you think that it's being tested again?
Absolutely.
As it has been tested along the way?
The Constitution has been under an attack for over 100 years. And the seeds of the trouble we find ourselves in today were sown over 100 years ago. But it's a testament to the strength of the document and to the principles that underlie the entire structure of the Constitution, that it still manages to prevail even today.
How do you respond to people who say, well, the Constitution's 250 years old? I know what you just said. Sometimes they get insistent and they say things like, not only is it so old, but it doesn't speak to today's problems. Does it?
For the most part, people who say that are repeating what they have been told, because the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and all the amendments to the Constitution are not taught. The principles that underlie them are not taught. And I challenge
in public today.
They're not taught in public. They're not taught in the schools.
Huh?
They're not taught in the colleges. They're not taught in the law schools. The only thing that is taught today is that this is either outdated or it's a living document. If it's outdated, the meaning is that we can disregard it. And if it's a living document, it means that we can crush it underfoot and kill it. To those people who say it's old, it's outdated, it doesn't mean what it used to mean, I challenge you. Read it for yourself. Study it. There's stuff on my website that can help you to understand it, although this document is written in simple English. It says what it means, and it means what it says, and it can only be misunderstood by people with advanced degrees in English or law. And that's very true.
Touche. Yeah.
Discuss it, talk about it, think about it, read it, then we can talk about whether it's outdated.
It's almost as though those who ignore or disbelieve use it as an excuse. I totally agree with what you're saying. As long as they do take the time to sit down and read it and know what it says and know that it means what it says. The Founding Fathers worked on it for a very long time, and they tested it in every way that they possibly could. Some of those people, the world was just so totally different. I can understand that. They were verbal experts. We don't have verbal experts anymore. We don't have people who are not nearly enough who actually do what you're suggesting. I wish we did. I mean, just the fact that we do not dwell on language in school. I mean, at the elementary level and there's so much nonsense that is taught. This is the basis of life here in America. This is the single most important document.
So here, let's just take this little piece from the Declaration of Independence.
Please.
It's the second sentence. It's also the second paragraph because they did have a fondness for long run-on sentences. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inherent, inseparable, and unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and property. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Right? So let's just look at that little bit and see how that really underpins all the struggles we see where people are fighting for equal justice and equal treatment. Okay? That these truths are self-evident. So what is truth? We go all the way back to Cicero.
Yeah.
Truth is natural law that obeys the structure built into the universe. Water's always going to flow downhill. If the sun comes out, it's going to warm up,
Yep.
right? If you try to change natural law and force water to go uphill, if you put pumps in place and make dikes and all the rest of this, you can push against natural law briefly for a short period in certain limited circumstances. But ultimately, the water's going downhill.
Yeah.
So unless you build a structure in accordance with the fabric of the universe, ultimately it will collapse.
Right.
So we have truth.
It's well put.
Truth. Self-evident means that it proves itself.
Yeah.
Right? That all men are created equal. Men is the collective noun for mankind, humanity. Male, female, whatever. Men, all of humanity. All are created equal. And yet, there's people who are tall and people who are short, people who are brilliant, people who are not so gifted, people who are like amazing basketball players, and people who couldn't catch a basketball if you handed it to them carefully, people who are brilliant with numbers, people who are brilliant at remembering names. We're all so different. And that's even completely disregarding the minor physical differences of skin color and eye color and
Right.
and all
Tall and short and whatnot.
So how are we
Underneath
equal?
it-
How on earth can we possibly be equal when we're all different? Equal in the eyes of the law, to be treated equally by the law, to have equal opportunity to make of our lives what we want our own lives to be,
Okay. Yeah.
without regard to anything else.
Yeah.
Right? But so created equal, and also we have to understand every culture on the planet except the one that this came from, endowed by their creator. These writers of the Declaration and of the Constitution were people who had a deeply held faith in God. If you want the atheist version, Ayn Rand has a beautiful 50 pages of it in her book Atlas Shrugged. Go read that. I'll leave that as a lesson for the student, right? All are equal in the eyes of God, made in his image, right?
Yep.
Made to express a portion of divinity itself, right? Truths are self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by their creator. So if I give you a gift, what power do you have to tell me the characteristics of that gift or to change the terms of the gift? Do you have any power to do that?
No, I don't, because
No.
you gave the gift to me.
Exactly.
You
If-
were the giver.
Or exactly. So if I'm going to give you a gift, it's up to me to determine what gift I want to give you
Right.
and to give it under my terms. If you've done something to earn it, it's wages. It's not a gift.
Right.
So a gift is freely given. And you have no authority to tell me the terms
Of
that are going to be
of the
attached to the gift.
gift. Right.
Even more so, neither of us have the authority to tell God what he may or may not do with the gifts he gives to us and to everybody
And
else.
to everyone. Right.
Right? So endowed by their
Your
creator. I hate the term constitutional rights. There are absolutely no rights confirmed upon people by the Constitution
They're
of the
given
United
to us
States.
by God.
They are given to us by God, because if they can be given to us by a document, another document can take them away.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if they're given to us by God, then they predate, supersede, and transcend the Constitution or any other law made by man.
Well put. Wow. Yeah.
Right? So, endowed by their creator, given freely by their creator, certain built-in rights. A right, as defined by Black's Law Dictionary, is the power of free action. You could say that it's something you need no permission for. So the opposite of a right would be something that you must have permission in order to do, and that is a privilege. One of the tricks that's being used today is the mixing of the ideas of right and privilege. Because if they can get people to confuse what a right is with what a privilege is, they can trick them into relinquishing control of their rights. So a right needs no permission and can be exercised without cost and without loss to any other person.
Okay.
All right? So all rights start from property, beginning with the very first piece of property you ever own, and it was on the day you were born, and it's your own body. Because if you do not have the power and the authority to determine what happens to your body, you are a slave. It's that basic and that fundamental. Property is the basis for all rights. So that includes your own person. It includes the things you make. It includes the things you think of, your intellectual property.
Does it include issue from me? No, that is that.
You mean like your kids?
Yes, like children. They are individually.
They are individuals, and it's your responsibility to give them the tools they need to be independent adults.
Okay.
All right? So your property always comes with a responsibility, right? If it's your property, you have to take care of it.
Yep.
We also come with the moral responsibility to help take care of other people. And if you're really, really interested in making sure that other people are taken care of properly, you want to keep the government out of it because they absolutely cannot do a good job compared to what private groups can do. And they have no impetus to fix their inherent problems. And we can get into that later if we have time. But why should the government not help the poor? Why should the government not help name the group? Because I want them to get what they need. And if we depend on government to do it, the people who need help will not get it. The people who do not need help will get it. And any inherent flaws in the system will only perpetuate and cause greater problems. That's why government needs to stay out of social services. So let's continue here. We have rights that are based on property, starting with our own persons.
Persons, right?
Every right implies a responsibility. Your rights extend until they interfere with mine. You know, you can say that this is I can wave my arms around wildly until I get too close to you. I do not have the right to punch you in the nose just because I'm being careless and flopping my arms around. All right? And if you ever have a question of whether or not something is a right or a privilege, the question that almost always resolves it is, who owns the property?
Okay.
So, a number of years ago, Harry Reid said, we're going to give them the right to health care. Well,
he didn't have that right.
He didn't have that power. Can you exercise the right to health care without cost or loss to any other person? No.
No, you can't.
Right? Do you own your body? Yes. Do you have the responsibility to take care of it? Yes. Do you then sometimes need medical care, medical assistance? Yes. Do you own the laboratory reagents? Do you own the needles and syringes? Do you own the drugs? Do you own the doctors and the nurses and the nursing assistants and the rest of the personnel at a medical establishment? No. Therefore, health care is not a right. It could be many other things, but a right is not on the list. And if you say that you can force someone to provide health care, even if you promise to pay them later, what you're saying is that you approve of slavery, as long as it serves you.
Never thought of it that way. Yeah.
That is exactly what it's saying.
Yeah.
If you can force someone to provide you a service, you are saying that you approve of and want to institute slavery.
Slavery.
If someone walks into my tax office, because that's my day job, I'm a tax accountant, and wants me to do their taxes, I have the right to refuse that person. I could simply be too busy. I could see that they're going to be the sort of troublesome client that's very difficult to deal with, and I really don't want any more of those. I can be suspicious that they're looking for cheap, or that they're looking to be a little less diligent than I prefer my clients to be, or I could just be in a bad mood that day and not want to deal with anyone. But if you can waltz into my office and demand that whether I wish to or wish not to, that I have to provide you with a completed tax return, you're enslaving me.
Exactly. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah.
So that's fundamentally,
Yeah.
do you believe in freedom for the individual? Then you believe in the Constitution. And you should be its greatest proponent. Frederick Douglass, the escaped slave, they actually wanted him to go on the lecture circuit talking about how horrible the Constitution was. And he said, well, I can do that for you, but before I go on that lecture circuit, I'm going to study the document myself and make sure I know what I'm talking about. And after a few weeks of study, he came back and he said, I cannot help you, gentlemen, because this is the most anti-slavery document I have ever read, that has ever been written. So let's go on here. Endowed by their creator with certain built-in unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and property, which was later changed to pursuit of happiness, to undercut the "but they're my property" argument. They're already looking ahead to killing slavery. Okay? That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So here it's saying that the only real legitimate purpose of civil governance is to protect and defend and hold inviolate for the people the rights given to them by God Almighty. Any power exercised that does not secure the rights of the people is therefore an invalid power of government, and it is an unjust power of government. But then let's also look at what is a just power. So a just power would be one that fulfills the government's mission to hold inviolate the rights of the people. It is a power that the people have consented to, that hasn't been stolen from them, but they have actually consented to. And it's a power that's being exercised at the right level of government, because you wouldn't want the Burlington Highway Department making international policy, and you wouldn't want the State Department in charge of inspecting the escalators at the Burlington Mall. Has to be at the right level. Right? The Highway Department should fix potholes, and the State Department should deal with international relations. Right? So, and that's just from a sentence here in the Declaration of Independence.
There has been talk at different times about, I'm not sure of how they put it, but that God has no part in the Constitution. They approach it in different ways. They deny the existence, or they simply say that it should not be stated. I think the framers...
For those people, just take one of these little pocket constitutions and go through the Declaration of Independence, which in this edition starts on page 35, and take a pencil. And every time you see God, nature, nature's God, the divine author, divine protection, divine this, just underline it, and then go count them up. There are a remarkable number of them there.
Yeah. No, I have no doubts that the framers used God as their reference point, their final reference point. But there are those today who do look askance at the fact that God is even mentioned in the Constitution. There are so many, the Constitution has been attacked in so many different ways, and is currently being attacked in terms of its modernity. And as you've clearly indicated in these are words for all times. These are words for, I don't even know the correct terminology, but they're words forever.
Well, again, if something is true, it's true.
Right.
If something is founded and grounded in the very structure of the universe, you can't outgrow that.
Yeah.
That doesn't become outdated.
But
water doesn't suddenly start going uphill just because it's been going downhill for like forever, and it's like time to go uphill for a while.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't happen. It always goes downhill.
Downhill, yeah. No, but it's amazing to me that, and it has always been amazing since I've become aware of the Constitution, that the framers actually went through these arguments, and they did not stop. They argued, they disagreed, they spoke, and they lectured, and they investigated.
They went back to Aristotle, and they went back to Cicero, and they went to John Locke, and they went to Aimé de Vattel, and they went to all sorts of other sources.
Authorities.
They read in ancient Greek, they read in Latin, they read in French. They were extremely learned men. You know, I've been studying and teaching the Constitution for about a dozen years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm only scratching the surface. And yet I've had more than a half a dozen lawyers tell me that they learned more about the Constitution from me in an hour than they learned in an entire year of constitutional law back in law school.
Do you think the Constitution is being taught sufficiently
Absolutely
anywhere?
not.
Absolutely not. I was afraid
not.
you were going to say that.
It is not being taught in the schools except as a living document or as an outdated and outmoded and just disregardable document. It's not being taught in the colleges except, again, as this old piece of nonsense that we really need to get rid of. And it's not being taught in the law schools. It just, they teach constitutional law, but they teach case law. And the problem with case law is that the first case starts on the Constitution, and then you get 150 years down the road, and instead of being based here on the Constitution, your decisions are based up here.
The thing that is most amazing to me is that those individuals, and I've known and I've talked to, I have an ongoing argument with a very dear friend who is of the other political persuasion, and totally agrees with the fact that the Constitution changes. In other words, it does not become sufficiently modern to take on the problems that we have today. But as
But it does.
The basis.
One of the issues is that people have, because the Constitution and the principles it was built on are not taught, they've ended up with this very skewed view of the proper function of government. Right? Government is not daddy. Government is not big brother. Government is not nanny. Right? The purpose of government is to safeguard your rights so that you can build your life into whatever you want it to be, free from government interference. That's the proper function of government.
So then one should expand, or one could expand on that and say that regardless of how the world or life or the responsibilities of life change in this ever-changing world, and God only knows how fast it's changing today, there still is those basic fundamental rights that have been given to us that are the overarching rules and the laws of mankind, or at least of our Constitution for everyone here in America.
So again, we go back to that all rights are based on property, and property starts with your body and what you make and what you conceive in your head. Do you want a government so strong that it'll say to you, or to your son, your grandson, your granddaughter, you're going to be a plumber? It'd be really nice to find a good plumber, actually, but if what you really want is to be an electrician, do you want somebody forcing you to be a plumber?
No.
All right? I'm a tax accountant. I cannot remember names to save my life. God bless me. Numbers I can remember. Don't put me in charge of public relations. Very nice to meet you, Mr. Smith. What was his name? It's gone. It's already gone, right? So if you have a government that's in charge of everything, it's ultimately going to make everyone miserable, because it's going to say, oh, we've got enough electricians, so you have to be a plumber. Oh, we've got enough plumbers, you need to be, a pipe fitter. We have enough pipe fitters, you need to be an accountant. We have enough accountants, you have to work in marketing.
Even you're my son, and I want you to be. Oh, you're my daughter, and I want you to be.
One of the amazing freedoms we have here that it's so much ingrained in us we don't even realize it. My degree is Earth, Planetary, and Atmospheric Sciences from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I worked as a materials engineer for a dozen years. and stopped when my kids were little. And by the time I went to go back, I didn't want to work 60-hour weeks with little kids. So I thought, well, what can I do? And I had put myself through college doing bookkeeping because my dad was an accountant and I kind of don't remember not knowing how to keep a double entry ledger. So I thought, I'll be a money engineer. And I just got a job doing bookkeeping, and it morphed, and I've had my own tax and accounting business for more than 20 years. You can't do that in Europe.
Yeah, I know.
You cannot do it. It is not permitted. Not permitted. My degree is in Earth, Planetary, and Atmospheric Sciences. I can be a materials engineer. I can be a geologist. I can be, some sort of climate scientist. That's my choices. I can't do accounting. I can't do taxes. I can't do bookkeeping. Nope.
As a European.
Cannot do it. Not allowed.
Yeah. But here in America.
You can do it.
You can do it, yeah. Yeah. Because of the only interpretation of what the Founding Fathers put into our Constitution. Fundamental. There is nothing more fundamental.
That your life is yours.
Yeah.
And you get to choose what you're going to make of it.
Right.
I could have chosen to be a plumber, and I could have gone off and gotten, some training in plumbing and been an apprentice and then a journeyman and gotten my plumber's license. I could have done it. There's nothing to stop me. In Europe, if you don't choose that path going into high school so that you go to the right trade school, that's it, you're done.
Yeah.
You can't go back. Not allowed.
Often, I know personally, often it was what your dad was is what you're going to be, no matter whether you think you're a better mathematician or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. You're going to be what dad.
If your dad was the village blacksmith, you're the village blacksmith.
Yeah, the village blacksmith, and that was it still is to a very, very large degree. So here in America, it was this very experiment that for the first time said to people, you have your personal, complete rights to do whatever you want with your body, your responsibility for your body, and your will, your own personal choice is to be respected. Insofar as it doesn't involve or doesn't hurt anyone else. In other words, it's
pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
If you want to study ancient Egyptology and become a professor of arcane Egyptian dynasty lore, go right ahead.
You know how many times, as I think back now, there have always been those stories about so-and-so who was someone's child and totally unexpected went into a business or a kind of study. You are a good example of that. How important that is. And that is the fundamental, how can I express it? That is the basis of the Constitution. Then they went on from there and devolved all of the other laws that pertain to a government that would oversee that particular right to make sure that that your right to own and do as you wish with your own body is recognized and acknowledged and accepted. There's so many aspects. I can understand why. Some people, many people, a very dear friend of mine, as I mentioned a moment ago, who is an avowed person of change. The acceptance of change. Everything is changing, and they keep harping on that. Everything is changing. The Constitution is 250, 60 years old. How can it mean the same thing? It's very difficult to get that message across.
And again, I would, recommend to your friend that they come to one of my classes. I hold 2 classes a month. And
where?
In Bedford at the Woburn Sportsmen's Association,
okay.
And in Arlington at my office.
Okay, are those published?
Those are published. Yes, my website is constitutiondecoded.com.
If you can put that on, if you can.
Constitutiondecoded.com, and the study group schedule has all the class dates and locations and directions and all the rest of it. It's got articles, it's got videos.
And this is what, monthly?
every month.
Every month.
Every month, you can catch my articles in the Boston Broadside,
Yeah.
etc.
Oh, I forgot to. She is in the Boston Broadside.
Constitutional snippets.
This is a wonderful paper. If you haven't, here is Constitutional Snippets, it's called, by Catherine White. A wonderful article. I just read I'd read some of it earlier. I looked at it again tonight. A wonderful article, and a wonderful newspaper, by the way. You should get it.
But I would recommend to your friend that they come to one of my classes
Okay.
and learn what the Constitution actually says,
Mm-hmm.
what it actually means, and how all of our friends who think that the Constitution is outdated and they're all for making this change and making that change because we need to protect and we need to do this, come and see how the actual Constitution already does all that. And the problem is the areas where we've gotten away from the original intention of the Constitution. The problems all are based in where we've gotten away from original intent.
How we started to misinterpret at one point. And would you say that today there is perhaps more misinterpretation of the Constitution, to the best of your knowledge, than there has been in the past? You mentioned the schools, for example.
There's complete misinterpretation in law simply because the Constitution isn't taught. They teach case law, and if everything is based on precedent, then you get away from your principles extremely quickly. Anybody else who talks about the Constitution who hasn't been to law school, for the most part, they are repeating talking points they heard somewhere else because they've never actually picked up the document and tried to read it with understanding.
It's amazing that even law schools do not, they just follow precedent.
Just follow case law.
Case law, yeah. You would think that they would be the first line people who would want to know that they're teaching according to the original tenets of the Constitution. One
of the people who has come to my class a number of times pointed out that after the Civil War, we actually had quite an upsurge in our prosperity as we got off of the wartime footing and back to the peacetime footing, and the enrollment in universities skyrocketed. We didn't have enough homegrown professors, so we started importing professors from Europe who had the very monarchy, aristocracy, the orders come from the top and you peons just toe the line mindset, and they came into the colleges and universities to teach.
Infected.
They infected. They had no concept of the principles that this country was founded on.
Mm-hmm.
How could they have?
Yeah.
How could they have?
No, they couldn't. Not coming from that kind of background. They were bred and lived the very opposite of what our Constitution is all about.
So
I wish Joan was here.
So let's just look at the preamble to the Constitution, which, if you're on this little document, on page 1. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So it's the people and the states. What's the position of the federal government in this preamble?
To enable
Read it. Where's the federal government?
There is no form of government here.
Bingo! Who's in charge?
Oh,
the people and the states.
Each of us individually. There is no government. Oh, yes.
There is a principle in law that predates the signing of the Magna Carta, which was in 1215, that says that the created entity is never greater in legal standing than that which creates it. So the people and the states ordain and establish the Constitution, which creates the federal government. Therefore, the federal government is the creature.
Oh.
It is the servant,
Oh.
and it is subordinate in
To-
power to the people and the states. Does that resemble the government we have today,
No.
that tells you what kind of toilet you can put in your house and what kind
Exactly.
of light bulb
Yeah,
you can put in
yeah.
your garage door opener?
Yeah. No, not at all.
It's kind of
Not at all.
gotten turned
But
on
then
its
again,
head.
but then again, I remember reading, and Justice Thomas is perhaps the best or the most profound advocate of the U.S. Constitution, and he runs into that frequently, where he where they are trying to convince him once again that what he believes in, the fundamental Constitution itself and what the Constitution says about individual power, that today they just ignore it. They just try to run roughshod over it, interpreting.
And that tells you what their fundamental desire is, which is to run roughshod over the rights of individuals to run their own lives on their own terms, which is what our dear friends on the left are all running around screaming about. We want to have the right to run our lives this way and this way and this way. It's like, well, then you want to support the Constitution, because that supports your right to live your life however you want, subject only to the restriction that you do not interfere with the rights of others to live their lives how they want. So anybody who's saying that, you know, we have to do it this way, we have to do it that way, it doesn't mean what it said. It means, you know, we have to change how we interpret it. They're basically saying they want the government in charge of your life.
You're right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And ultimately, where that leads, if you carry that concept
Forward.
to its natural conclusion, the
Right.
conclusion that it inevitably gets to,
Mm-hmm.
is you have tyranny.
Right. We are on that road here in America.
We are on that road.
With-
There are an amazing amount of people who are fighting to keep us from that road.
I know.
And you won't hear about them on the 6 o'clock news.
No.
You will.
What
but
you
they,
hear
but they are
about
out there.
is the agency and the problem that that particular agency has, and how they took whatever it is, they made a decision on it. Nothing about the government, the Constitution, and the ultimate right that the individual has, as you've so well expressed, that should be respected. No, it gets to the power of this particular agency. I mean, there are so many of them today. You know, it's like hundreds of different governments. You know, every agency has certain powers over the individual, whether it's the SEC or the you know, the Registry of Motor. I mean, you can think of any agency that exists within not only a city government, but within a state government, even the state itself. The question comes up: does the state respect the Constitution to the extent that it should?
Well,
you know,
here's the problem with the states. The problem with the states is that they have allowed themselves to be bribed by federal money that originally came from the states. So the way it works, and what really got the federal government to outgrow its britches, was the 16th Amendment, which was the income tax, right? It gave them money, right?
Right.
And the 17th Amendment, which made the senators elected by popular vote instead of by the state legislatures. So the states lost their ambassadors and their watchdogs over the federal government, right? But what goes on now is the federal government taxes people, and will bring $1,000, we'll say, to Washington. Well, they'll pocket $400 worth, and then take the other $600 and dangle it in front of the states. Here you go. You want this, don't you? It's $600. All you have to do is whatever we want you to do. And then you can have the $600.
Right.
And then you get to go to your state and you say, see, we got $600 for you
Let's do
in
it
federal
again.
funding, ignoring that it was 1,400 pocketed and then being bribed with your own money.
Right.
So the states are complicit. They've gotten addicted to federal money, ignoring the fact that that federal money came from their own
Originally,
people.
Yeah.
All right? And they've abdicated to some extent of their role as the watchdogs over encroachment of federal power into areas reserved for state control. And again, I'll say to the people who decry the bureaucratic state that we've got, what was the structure intended to be? Why was it intended to be that way? Then we can talk about how it's changed shape and where the problems lie. And the problems always lie, again, when we ignore the principles the Constitution was based on.
Catherine, one thing that just keeps running through my mind is, 13 original colonies, and this was written then, and their world was relatively small. Their population was small. I think you know what I'm going to say. As we have grown now to 350, 300, what, how many are we at? Over 300 million?
Yeah.
The needs of a growing, complex society, very complex society, to try and carry all of those, is it possible still to adhere to those basic? And I think, I have a feeling that this is probably what some of the opponents would say. Is it reasonable and possible for us to still keep that basic principle over everything that we do, given that we have now such a complex society?
Absolutely. In fact, I would say that the more complex the society, the more crucial it is to adhere to the principles of the Constitution, because no large entrenched bureaucracy can respond to the needs of a complex society quickly enough to actually do any good that they intend to do, instead of just making things worse.
But if you have the Supreme Court that has to rule on every issue, assuming...
Where in this document does it say the Supreme Court has to rule on every issue? It's not there. We don't understand the Constitution. The legislative branch passes laws in accordance with the powers granted by the Constitution. The executive then signs those laws, and the executive's job is to refuse to sign those laws if they are not in accordance with the Constitution, and then to make sure those laws in accordance with the Constitution are implemented and executed properly. The judiciary is to deal with federal cases, and this whole thing about the Supreme Court is the only ones who interpret the Constitution is nonsense. It's based on Marbury versus Madison in 1803, where the first thing they had to decide is whether or not they had the authority to hear the case. But the states have an equal part and an equal job to refuse to implement federal laws that are not in accordance with the Constitution.
They should.
Four different places.
Yeah, where the intent of the Constitution is tested.
And where the power of the in fact, you know who has the absolute final authority on the Constitution? County sheriffs.
How so?
There have actually been about a half a dozen different Supreme Court decisions where a county sheriff has made a decision in accordance with the Constitution, and it's been protested, and it's made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court invariably says, yep, county sheriff's the last one to make the determination.
So if an issue comes down to, I can't imagine, well, something having to do with law at the lower level, the county sheriff is the one who will.
The county sheriff is
he's
the one who
he's
makes
the one who should uphold
the Constitution. Yes, yes,
Wow.
indeed.
Wow, makes me think
So,
of.
but here's for example an interesting piece about all the different levels. Remember a few years ago there was that the lawsuit in federal court between Arizona and the federal government because the federal government was not enforcing immigration law as currently written, and Arizona said, okay, we're going to go in and enforce federal law since the feds aren't doing it. And the federal government sued the state of Arizona in federal district court in Arizona. So here's the amusing thing. I mean, when you look at it, just on the face of it, it's amusing, right? Here's the law as written. It's the job of the executive to make sure that that law is enforced. The executive wasn't enforcing it. And if you don't like the law, it's Congress's job to change it, not the executive, right? So the executive's job is this constitutional? Yes, they were given the power in Article 1, Section 8. Okay, I have to enforce it. If I don't like it, I tell Congress, you really ought to fix it. But they didn't enforce it. So then the state comes in and says, okay, we're going to enforce it because this is federal law and it needs to be enforced, right? And then the federal government sues the state in federal district court. And yet, if you go to Article 4 of the Constitution, it says that in any case in which a state shall be a party, in any lawsuit in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall, not may, not might, shall, as in must, have original jurisdiction. So was this at Supreme Court? No, this was in federal district court in Arizona. And I was just waiting and hoping that the first day of the trial, one of the attorneys for the state of Arizona would step up and say, Your Honor, I move that you dismiss this case because in accordance with Article 4, Section 2, I believe it is, of, maybe it's Section 3, of the U.S. Constitution, which states that in all cases in which a state shall be a part, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. Your Honor, you do not have authority to hear this case and therefore must dismiss it. But nobody did. So dozens of federal attorneys, dozens of attorneys for the state of Arizona, and a federal judge, and not one of them knew that they were in the wrong courtroom. Not one of them
That is
knew.
amazing, really, really. I remember the case. I remember when it came up.
It's
yeah,
like,
that
guys,
is truly
it's black
amazing.
and white.
Yeah.
This is not rocket science.
Yeah. Well, you can point to that as an indication of, I hate to say it, but the original Constitution, the intent of the Constitution, no, not the intent of the Constitution, the Constitution itself says, and what it says, has been pushed aside or over-interpreted, or liberties have been taken with the interpretation. There are just so many things, and it.
And let's just go on to another little section here
Go
that
ahead.
underscores this.
Go
In
ahead.
Article 6, it says, this Constitution, this one, and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. But what does this actually say? It says, the Constitution and the laws made by Congress in pursuance thereof. Not every law made by Congress, not every regulation by some agency that Congress did not have the authority to give regulatory power to, but the laws in pursuance of the Constitution, in the areas where the Congress had been given jurisdiction. right, that uphold the principles and the purposes of the Constitution to secure the rights of the people, right? Those are the supreme law of the land. Only those. And the treaties, which are under the authority of the United States. So there's been, it's a fundraising thing. They send around the little letters saying, they're going to have the UN small arms ban, so send us money so that we can fight this. The federal government is given absolutely no authority over the ownership of firearms by individuals. So even if that treaty was signed and the Senate ratified it, they have no authority. If we, the people and the states, understand the Constitution and understand our power, what we say is that is a usurpation of power not granted and therefore null, void, and of no effect within the borders of this state. And if you don't like it, federal government, you can go have a nice cry into a linen hanky, because that's not our problem. You were never given the power by we the people and the states, and we're the ones in charge, not you.
Right.
Principle predating the Magna Carta. The people are in charge. The states are in charge. They are superior to the federal government in their inherent power.
That is precisely the message that that Supreme Court Justice Thomas tries to, at least, from what I've read, and also, what?
1 minute.
Oh, you're kidding me. 1 minute, oh
Come
my
to a class.
God.
Come to a class.
We've just barely touched upon.
We just barely touched it, yes.
Will you come back?
Absolutely.
I can't give you a date
That's
right
okay.
now.
We'll worry about
it
that
will be
later.
after the first of the year, obviously. Sometimes probably in the very early spring in that area. I'll call you. I'll be
Okay.
in touch.
Until
would
then,
until then, yes, read it.
read it.
Read it, absorb
Go to,
it,
go to
and
my
know
website.
and know the
read
truth.
some of my articles.
Is there anything you would like? I thank you for watching. As you can see, or if you've been listening, this is a wonderful. It's a story of your life, my life, her life, all of us. The most important thing that we can possibly talk about today, especially in today's climate. Is there something you would like to say, or with regard to the two classes that you teach?
Arlington and Bedford, the second Monday of the month in Bedford, and the Wednesday following in Arlington. The schedule's on constitutiondecoded.com, the study group schedule page. Thank you.
Okay, and they will give you address and everything that you need.
Address, everything you need.
Are those on a special night, or are they?
Second Monday of the month,
Second
and
Monday
then
of
the
the month.
Wednesday
Okay, great.
following that.
Catherine, thank you so very much. I really enjoyed, and I feel better about what I know is the right way of, or what our intention is, our Constitution intended. What can I say? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
I do look forward to you coming back. We will pick up right exactly where we left off.
This one's for you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, thank you very, very much. Also, are we there almost? I think we got about 30 seconds left. To the audience, thank you for tuning in. I'm sure that you got a lot of good insight into what the single most important document in our lives today, the U.S. Constitution, what it's all about. Everything, every problem you can think of emanates from it. Thank you for joining us. Please look forward. I have a lot of great guests coming. Catherine has promised that she will return. I don't know exactly when. I will let you know in future broadcasts. We broadcast usually Tuesday, every Tuesday, first or second, third Tuesday of the month. Please look for our notifications. Thank you and good evening to all of you. God bless America.